For 3,000 years, the Odyssey has been told as a myth of gods, magic, and monsters. But the true story is far more terrifying. It is a gritty story of survival, piracy, and the deadly reality of the Bronze Age collapse. This is not a fairy tale. This is a geographical thriller tracking the exact, real-world route of a desperate fleet. Our story begins in the ruins of a real historical city, Troy. After 10 years of brutal warfare, the Greek armadas finally packed up their loot and prepared to sail home. But the Mediterranean Sea was a death trap for ancient galleys. They had no compasses, no advanced navigation, only the stars and the unpredictable winds. And they were starving. The 10-year siege had completely drained their supplies. To survive, these heroes became something else entirely: ruthless pirates. Their first stop was the real-world coastal city of Ismarus in Thrace. They didn't come to trade. They sacked the city, slaughtering the men and stealing the livestock. But the Thracians counterattacked, forcing Odysseus and his crew into a bloody, desperate retreat. Fleeing the mainland, they attempted to round Cape Malea, the deadliest point in southern Greece. Here, a massive historical weather anomaly, hurricane-force northern winds, caught their sails. For 9 days, they were blown completely off the known map. Modern geographers believe these winds pushed them straight across the sea to the shores of Libya, the legendary land of the Lotus Eaters. But the lotus wasn't magic. It was likely the real-world blue lotus of the Nile, known for its intense narcotic and hallucinogenic effects. Starving and traumatized by war, the men chose the drug over going home. Odysseus had to drag them away by force. Fleeing the narcotic haze, they sailed north, completely blind, straight toward the volcanic island of Sicily. In the epic, this is the island of the Cyclops. In reality, it was the territory of isolated, highly territorial Sicilian tribes. The one-eyed giant may have been a historical misunderstanding of ancient Sicilian metallurgists, or a metaphor for the sheer, brutal strength of the locals who trapped Odysseus in a cave to slaughter them. The blinding of the Cyclops reflects the brutal guerrilla tactics required to escape an overwhelming enemy. Escaping by the skin of their teeth, they fled back to the ocean, pursued by a hail of giant rocks. Escaping the volcanic coast, the battered fleet found a brief respite on a floating island, the realm of Aeolus, keeper of the winds. Geographers map this to the Aeolian Islands, a real volcanic archipelago north of Sicily, historically notorious for violently unpredictable weather. The myth says Aeolus gifted Odysseus a leather bag containing all the storm winds, ensuring a safe trip home. But historians see a different story. The bag of winds was likely a hoard of looted Trojan treasure, fiercely guarded by a paranoid captain. Driven mad by starvation and greed, the crew mutinied. They tore open the bags, destroying their own fleet's discipline in a scramble for gold. Just as their homeland was in sight, the mutiny caused them to lose control of the ships during a massive Mediterranean squall, blowing them back out to sea. Blown wildly off course, they arrived at a sheer, cliff-ringed harbor, the land of the Laestrygonian cannibals. This geographical description perfectly matches the Strait of Bonifacio in modern-day Corsica. It wasn't home to magical giants. It was the perfect ambush point for hostile local tribes. The locals rained boulders down on the trapped Greek ships below, pulverizing 11 of Odysseus's 12 galleys in a historical massacre. Only Odysseus's flagship, anchored cautiously outside the harbor, managed to cut its lines and flee into the dark waters. With only one ship left, the traumatized survivors reached the shores of Aiaia, home to the beautiful witch Circe. This matches the real-world Cape Circe on the western coast of Italy, a mountainous peninsula that looks exactly like an island from the sea. The myth claims Circe used a magical potion to turn Odysseus' scouting party into pigs. The reality? The men likely succumbed to endemic malaria from the Italian swamps, or were heavily drugged with local hallucinogens by a matriarchal cult. Odysseus, immune to the magic? He likely just avoided the contaminated food or traded for a local medicinal remedy to save his dying men. But Circe gave them a terrifying ultimatum. Before they could go home, they had to navigate to the very edge of the world. They had to sail to the realm of Hades, the underworld, to consult the dead. They didn't travel to a magical realm. They sailed to the Campi Flegrae, the Phlegraean fields near modern-day Naples. To a Bronze Age sailor, this massive steaming volcanic caldera, venting sulfur and boiling mud, looked exactly like the gates of hell. In the dead of night, they performed a necromantic ritual, sacrificing a black ram and letting the blood pour into a trench to summon the spirits. But this journey to the underworld was deeply psychological. It was the absolute breaking point of a traumatized veteran. Staring into the toxic sulfurous smoke, Odysseus didn't see demons. He hallucinated the faces of his fallen comrades from the Trojan War. He saw his fellow kings. He saw his mother, who died of grief waiting for him. The immense, crushing guilt of survival. Having faced his deepest demons in the volcanic ash, Odysseus realizes the hardest part of the journey is still ahead. Leaving the toxic fumes of the volcanic coast behind, the lone ship sailed south toward the treacherous Strait of Messina. But first, they had to pass the jagged shoals of the Sirens, creatures said to lure sailors to their deaths with an irresistible song. The song was likely a deadly acoustic anomaly, wind howling through porous cliff faces, masking the sound of breaking waves on lethal hidden reefs. Or terrified sailors were simply hearing the eerie, echoing barks of Mediterranean monk seals echoing across the misty water. To survive, the crew plugged their ears with beeswax, rowing completely blind and deaf through a nautical minefield. But surviving the shoals only meant they had reached the ultimate choke point, Scylla and Charybdis. Charybdis was not a magical maw that drank the ocean. It represents the very real, lethal tidal whirlpools created by the meeting of the Ionian and Tyrrhenian seas. To avoid being sucked into the deep, Odysseus had to hug the opposite shoreline, the domain of Scylla. Myth describes Scylla as a six-headed beast that snatched men from the deck. In reality, a rogue wave simply smashed the ship against the jagged coastal reefs. 6 of his best men were instantly crushed against the rocks, dragged down by the brutal undertow. Traumatized and grieving, the shattered crew limped to the nearby island of Thrinacia to repair their ship. They were trapped on the island for a month by unyielding southern winds, completely exhausting their remaining rations. In the myth, they foolishly slaughtered the sacred cattle of the sun god. Historically, they likely raided a protected temple precinct, stealing livestock belonging to a powerful local warlord, despite Odysseus's desperate warnings. For this sacrilege, the epic says Zeus destroyed their ship with a thunderbolt. The reality? They were forced to sail into a catastrophic Mediterranean tempest, and their severely compromised, rotting ship simply tore itself apart. The crew that had survived Troy, survived the pirates, and survived the starvation was entirely wiped out in minutes. Odysseus alone managed to lash a piece of the broken mast to the keel, building a desperate makeshift raft. For 9 days, he drifted in the open ocean. No food, no fresh water, baked by the brutal Mediterranean sun. He was pushed west, far from Greece, washing up half dead on the shores of Ogygia. Scholars firmly believe this island was Malta, a remote, deeply isolated rock in the center of the sea. Here, he was taken in by Calypso, a nymph in the myth, but likely a wealthy local matriarch or tribal leader. She saved his life, offering him shelter, food, and protection. But the paradise of Malta quickly became a psychological prison. He was trapped here, utterly alone with his survivor's guilt, for 7 agonizing years. After 7 years of profound isolation, Odysseus finally found the will, or the opportunity, to escape the island of Malta. Navigating by the stars, he crossed the Ionian Sea, only to have his makeshift raft shattered by one final, brutal storm, just miles from land. He washed ashore, naked and half dead, on the island of Scheria, territory of the wealthy, seafaring Phaeacians. Desperate, he begged for asylum. The Phaeacians, historically representing the advanced maritime trade networks of the Bronze Age, agreed to take the veteran home. In the dead of night, a fast Phaeacian galley rowed him across the final stretch of sea, dropping the sleeping king on the rocky shores of Ithaca. When he woke, he didn't kiss the ground. He didn't announce his return. He hid his treasure and assessed the geopolitical reality of his kingdom. Ithaca was in crisis. With the king presumed dead, a rival political faction had occupied his palace. They were the suitors, but this wasn't romance. This was a bloodless coup. They were eating his wealth to bankrupt his estate and forcing his wife into a political marriage. Queen Penelope had held them off through sheer political brilliance, but her time was up. A violent transition of power was imminent. In the myth, the goddess Athena magically disguised Odysseus as an old beggar. In reality, 20 years of war, starvation, and sun exposure had simply made him unrecognizable. He infiltrated his own home, making contact with the only 2 people he could trust, a loyal swineherd and his now grown son, Telemachus. They didn't plan a magical reveal. They planned a brutal, tactical assassination of over 100 men. The trap was sprung during a festival. Penelope announced she would marry the man who could string Odysseus's massive recurve bow and shoot through 12 axe heads. One by one, the arrogant, wealthy politicians tried and failed to bend the heavy historical weapon. They lacked the sheer, brutal strength of a seasoned warlord. Then, the ragged, filthy beggar stepped forward. The room erupted in cruel laughter. But the laughter died instantly when he effortlessly bent the wood, strung the bow, and fired an arrow flawlessly through the 12 axes. At that exact moment, Telemachus and the loyal servants quietly locked the massive wooden doors from the inside. They had secretly removed all the shields and spears from the walls. The suitors were trapped, unarmed, in a room with the deadliest veteran in the Mediterranean. What followed was not a heroic duel. It was a brutal, systematic slaughter, a Mycenaean massacre. When the arrows ran out, Odysseus, Telemachus, and the servants drew their heavy bronze swords. The panicked politicians tried to beg for their lives, offering gold and land, but the king had no mercy for the men who tried to steal his kingdom. In less than an hour, over 100 men lay dead. The floor of the great hall was a lake of blood and wine. Only then did Penelope enter the hall. She didn't embrace him immediately. The man covered in blood was a stranger compared to the young king who left 20 years ago. She tested him with a secret only they knew: the construction of their marriage bed built into the roots of a living olive tree. Only when he passed did she finally break down. The Odyssey ends not with a magical happily ever after, but with a deeply scarred, traumatized veteran sitting on a bloody throne, having finally fought his way back from the edge of the world.